Hi guys, welcome back. We're here to continue the Gingerbread Bakery, and I love this setup and I love this book. And it's by Laurie Gilmore. It's the newest one in her series, and we left off on chapter 11. Then, Annie's face was burrowed against something warm and firm, and her arm was draped over something solid, and breathing. Her fingers trailed along bare skin. She froze. Whose bare skin was she touching? And where the hell was she? Oh dear God, she was still in Mac's bed, and so was he. And apparently before she had woken up, her fingers had been tracing little lines across his abs where his t-shirt had risen up during the night. She carefully moved her hand off his stomach, hoping that if she moved slow enough, she wouldn't wake him. This was so embarrassing. She was completely curled around him like some kind of deranged monkey clinging to his back. How was she going to get out of this without him noticing? Because obviously the solution to this problem was to run as far away from Mac in his cozy bed as possible. Cookies and light displays and late night chats were one thing, but snuggling in his bed was an entirely different story. Before Annie could fully develop her escape plan, the body she was still inconveniently pressed against started shaking with laughter. "Good morning, Annie," Mac said, the amusement clear in his voice. Annie rolled away from him in horror. "Did you sleep well?" Mac asked, still laughing. "Oh God," she groaned. "I can't believe I was spooning you. I've never slept better. I like being the little spoon." Annie was still groaning when Mac rolled over to face her. He had a huge grin on his face, and between that and the messy morning hair falling over his forehead and the abs she'd just been fondling, Annie felt more confused than ever. Why did he have to be so damn cute? "You hungry?" he asked, still studying her with amusement. Annie was so relieved to not have to discuss the spooning incident further that she said yes, not considering the implications of her answer. Mac's smile grew. "Great, you can stay for breakfast." "Stay for breakfast? Isn't this your parents' house?" Annie assumed he'd want her out of there as quickly as possible. Mac shrugged. "Of course it is. Lucky for you, feeding people is my mother's favorite thing to do." "And that includes feeding random girls that stay overnight in your bedroom?" "Well, I don't know. This is the first time it's ever happened." With that interesting tidbit of information, Mac winked, rolled out of bed, and left Annie staring at the ceiling, wondering what she had gotten herself into with this boy, and what the hell she was going to do next, besides apparently eating breakfast with his mom. Mac popped his head out of the bathroom, toothbrush dangling from his mouth. "I've got an extra," he said, pointing to the toothbrush, "if you want to freshen up before breakfast." Annie covered her face, the new horror of what her breath might smell like dawning on her. Mac laughed, continuing with his brushing. "That wasn't a hint or anything. I just thought you might want to brush your teeth." Annie continued with her groaning. She was sure her hair was a mess. She didn't have a change of clothes or makeup, and she certainly didn't feel prepared to go meet Mac's mother or spend any more time with him before she went home and regrouped. She needed a plan. She needed to completely reevaluate her thoughts and feelings about Mac, and then determine what the hell to do about them. This whole thing had thrown Annie completely off kilter, and she did not like to be off kilter. Annie was an on kilter kind of girl. "Maybe I should go. I could slip out before your mom wakes up." Mac popped out of the bathroom again. "Nah, it's past 7. She's already up." Annie let her hand slide away from her face. She took a deep inhale to calm herself down, and the smell of bacon filled her nose. Mac was right. She had clearly missed her window to sneak out. She sat up, attempted to rake her fingers through her hair and get into some sort of order. She found her bag from last night still slung over the chair in the corner. She probably had at least a chapstick and tube of mascara in there. She would never leave home without those. Okay, maybe this was fine. Maybe she would eat some bacon, chat with Mac's mom, and then get out of here and pretend this whole weird night never happened. That was doable, right? Right. New plan in hand, Annie swung her legs out of bed and went to join Mac in the bathroom. She froze in the doorway, watching him splash water on his face. The whole scene was far too intimate. What did she really know about Mac besides that he liked sports, had more muscles than she knew were humanly possible, was sometimes a jerk, and sometimes, she thought, remembering last night, very sweet? And now here she was, watching his morning routine, getting a sneak peek at a popular boy in his natural habitat. It was surreal to say the least, and the whole thing was freaking her out because if she was being honest with herself, she liked seeing Mac this way. And if she was being completely honest with herself, she wanted to see more of him this way. Sleepy and rumpled with his hair a little bit wet. He looked harmless this way, like he couldn't hurt her. He looked nice. She didn't know what to do with that, or if there was anything she could do with that, but she definitely needed more than 4 hours of sleep to sort it all out. Max straightened and caught her looking at him in the mirror. He did that ridiculous winking thing again, and Annie was once again relieved that no one was here to witness the flush in her cheeks. Thankful she was the only one to feel her stomach flip-flop every time he looked at her. This was getting ridiculous. He scrubbed his face dry with the towel and then handed her his extra toothbrush. Annie was horrified at the thought of him watching her brush her teeth. That was one intimacy too far. She could not allow Mac to watch her brush and spit. He clearly sensed her hesitation, flashed her one more smile, and left the bathroom. "I'll give you a minute," he said from the bedroom. Annie closed the door with a sigh of relief. Why was she being so weird about this? None of this had to be a big deal. Nothing physical had happened between them last night. They'd had a chat. That was it. It was something that had happened between her and Hazel and Logan a million times before. Although, to be fair, neither Logan nor Hazel made her feel all hot and confused and twisty inside. She focused on brushing her teeth, splashing cold water on her face, and attempting to look like some semblance of herself instead of on the panic slowly building in her belly. She really needed her friends back before she did something she would regret. Because whatever was happening here, Annie already knew she would regret it. By the time she was following Mac up the stairs for breakfast, Annie had made up her mind that this morning would be the last part of their bizarre week of friendship. Annie had plenty of friends. She had plans. She had a future here in this town. Mac had, well, she didn't know what Mac had, other than the ability to make her completely flustered, but he was leaving anyway, so there was really no point in delving into these insane feelings she'd been having. She'd let herself, for a brief moment, indulge in the idea of living out the fantasy of her silly high school crush, paying attention to her. But that was all it was, a silly fantasy, and Annie didn't go for fantasy. "Morning, Mom," Mac greeted the petite woman pulling sizzling bacon out of a pan on the stove. She turned to face him, and Annie gave her a polite wave from her spot beside Mac in the doorway of the kitchen. Annie had seen Mac's mom before around town, of course, and she'd chaperoned a few field trips over the years. But Annie had never been in his house, and she had the same surreal feeling she'd had watching him brush his teeth, like she wasn't supposed to be here. His mother's eyebrows rose as she took in the two of them standing side by side, clearly still wearing last night's clothes. Annie shifted on her feet. Why did she feel so guilty when nothing had happened? Not to mention they were fully grown adults. She was allowed to do things like sleep at a guy's house. Wasn't she? Although this wasn't a guy's house. This was a guy's mom's house, which changed the math a bit. I didn't know you had a guess, she said, directing her attention to Mac. Mac cleared his throat, suddenly less confident in the face of his mother's scrutiny. "You know Annie," he said, as if that made things less weird. "Annabelle Andrews." Her eyebrows rose even higher. "I didn't know you two were friends." Annie bit back the words. "I didn't know we were friends either." And instead, she said, "Hello, Mrs. Sullivan. It's nice to see you again." "It's nice to see you too, Annie, although somewhat unexpected." Her gaze shifted back to her son. "I hope you were a gentleman," she said with a pointed look, "and that you remembered that it's only fun if everyone's having fun. And in the bathroom cabinet, we have plenty of—" "I know," Mac cut her off with a wince. His face was bright red. "I know, Mom, but it's really not like that. Annie is just a friend." Mac's mom looked skeptical at that assessment, but she gave a little shrug and let it drop. "Well, who's hungry?" she said, turning back to the pan on the stove. "I made bacon and eggs, but I'm happy to throw in some pancakes if you'd prefer, Annie." "Oh no, eggs are fine, thank you." Annie sat where Mac had gestured at the table. He nudged her shoulder. "Sorry about that," he whispered. Annie let out a small laugh. "Did your mom actually just remind you about the location of condoms in your house?" she whispered back. Mac's face turned even redder, but he laughed with her. "Yeah, and to make sure both partners get off." More giggles spilled out of Annie, even as her face heated with Mac's words. What would it be like to get off with Mac? "Now you've had a glimpse," he added, "of how horrifying my parents' sex talk was for me." Annie snorted. Mac grinned at her from his seat next to her. Mrs. Sullivan turned back to the table with 2 plates heaped with bacon, eggs, and toast. She looked like she was about to ask what was so funny, but seemed to change her mind halfway to the table. Instead, she smiled at them like she knew exactly what was happening here. Annie wished she would fill her in. They spent the rest of breakfast chatting about Annie's plans and the upcoming holidays and about how Annie's family was doing. Mac was mostly quiet, but after her initial nerves, Annie found it easy to talk to his mom. She was nice and funny, and Annie had always been good at talking to adults. Mac was so attached to me when he was little, his mom was saying. I couldn't even put him down long enough to bring in the groceries without him screaming his little head off. "Aw," Annie teased as Mac groaned. "Okay, Mom, I think that's enough stories that make me look like a sad little mama's boy for one day." His mom lovingly patted his cheek. "There's nothing wrong with loving your mother," she said. "And next time," she said, turning back to Annie, "I'll bring out the photo albums." She winked conspiratorially. "That would be great. I'd love to see them," Annie said, even as she wondered if there would be a next time that she sat and chatted with Mac and his mother after spending the night. It didn't seem likely. "We definitely don't need to do that," said Mac as he got up to clear the plates. "But you are so cute and chubby," his mom tried to take the plates from his hands. "I can get that. I'm sure you two have plans for the day." "Actually, I really should get home," Annie said before Mac could jump in with his next great idea. "Yep, I'm wide open to get these dishes done with you, for you, Mom." "Okay, sweetie, thanks for that. I need to get to work anyway." Mac leaned down so she could give him a kiss on the cheek before she hurried out of the kitchen to get ready for her shift. "I like your mom," Annie said. "Yeah, I like her too," Mac said, leaving the dishes in the sink for later. "She's kind of the best, which is why I need to find her the perfect Christmas present this year." "What do you usually get her?" Mac shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Usually something last minute, or if my dad's feeling generous, he'll let me throw my name on something he bought. Or some bullshit like that. Seems like it's time I up my gift-giving game." Annie happened to be an amazing gift giver. It was one of her special talents, something she really prided herself in. But she needed to get out of here and away from Mac and back to her regular life. She could not volunteer to help him, and yet it was taking all of her energy not to suggest it. "Anyway," Max said, "I'll probably go back to the Christmas market to look for something good." "Don't say it, Annie. Don't say it." She tried to hold it in. She really did, but that was a terrible idea. He couldn't just keep wandering the market waiting for a good idea to hit him. He needed to think about it before he went. The market was huge. He needed a plan. He needed her help. "I could come with you." Well, there goes that. She was not doing this because of the confused feelings last night had stirred up, or the possible sexual awakening Mac's abs had inspired this morning. She was doing this for Mac's mom, who deserved a good Christmas present this year. Maybe a little bit because of the abs. Mac's face lit up at the suggestion, and Annie's plan to spend time away from him went right out the window. She could live in the fantasy for a little bit longer. What was the harm in that? Chapter 12. Now. Mac had offered to drop Annie off at home so she could get other bridesmaid things done, and he would go check the inn. But as expected, Annie's control freak tendency were still in full swing. She didn't trust him to go alone. And even though he'd been asking Crystal out only a few minutes ago, he couldn't help the excitement he felt at spending time alone with Annie. This was the first time in over a decade that she'd even allowed it, other than the night of Hazel's birthday, and that had ended before it even started. He tried to give her the space she clearly wanted, but in a town like this, avoidance was impossible, especially since he and Logan had bonded over their secret love for creating little woodland scenes in decorative glass containers at Iris's terrarium making class, and become better friends than they had ever been in school. Annie had become unavoidable. She was everywhere: town hall meetings, holidays, at Logan's house, farmers markets, festivals, school fundraisers. The woman was omnipresent. He didn't hate it, but unfortunately, she hated him. Not that he could really blame her. He'd fucked up all those years ago. He was perfectly aware of that, but Christ, could that woman hold a grudge? How could Annie possibly still hold him accountable for his actions when he was a kid? He'd attempted to apologize, to explain multiple times since he'd been back, and she wouldn't even let him try. Right on track, Mac had swung from pining over Annie to being pissed that she wouldn't even hear him out. That was typical too. By the time they arrived at the inn, he was equal parts frustrated with her and eager to hang out with her. You should get me drinks more often, she said as she hopped out of the truck. He ignored her pointed look. What, so you can pour it on me? No thanks. He strode toward the front entrance. That was one time, Annie protested, hurrying to catch up. Twice, he said, pausing at the big double doors to the inn. If you count the beer I bought you as a peace offering on my first night working at the pub. She was at least embarrassed enough to look mildly apologetic about that one. Right, sorry, I forgot about that time. The other had been a thankfully lukewarm cocoa he'd bought her at last year's Christmas tree lighting, a shameless attempt to bring back memories of a happier Christmas between them. The cocoa landing in his lap had ended their dream pretty quickly. Yeah, well, fool me twice. He yanked open the door, rattling the giant evergreen wreath hanging from it. What crawled up your butt since the cafe? Annie asked, scurrying in behind him. Nothing crawled up my butt, he said, far too loudly for the quiet lobby. Several guests warming themselves by the fireplace gave him the side eye as he walked by. Sometimes these little trips down memory lane make me wonder why I ever want to spend time around you, he said, lowering his voice as they approached the front desk. Annie shrugged, but he could see the flicker of hurt in her eyes. You're free to go. I can take it from here. She rang the silver bell on the counter, flipping her ponytail over her shoulder and hitting him in the face with it. Oh no, I'm invested now. Besides, I know you think you have dibs on Logan, but he's my friend too. And as his best man, I should be involved in the Nana search. Annie rolled her eyes. Whatever, and you're not his best man. Noah is. Fine, as one of his lesser groomsmen, it is still within my duties to find his grandmother. Keep your voice down, Annie hissed. We don't need the whole town knowing she's missing. And why is that exactly? It seemed to Mac that more people who knew, the quicker they would find her. Annie sighed like it should be obvious, because then it will get back to Jenny and Logan, and instead of spending the day between their wedding relaxing, they'll spend it being stressed out. And that is not what we bridal party people are shooting for. Got it? Max shrugged. He still thought Annie was taking her bridesmaid duties a little bit too seriously, but he did want his friend to have a good wedding weekend. He leaned in closer to Annie, for Logan's sake. Fine, we'll keep it a secret, he whispered. He couldn't help his smug smile when Annie shivered at his nearness. She could deny it all she wanted, but her body always gave her away. Right, good. Annie's voice was breathy and low, and it hit Mac then, the reason why she never wanted to spend time alone with him. It was way too hard to pretend they hated each other this way. His smug smile grew. They were still standing way too close when Jack emerged from the back wearing a red bow tie, a Christmas vest covered in reindeer, and with not a hair out of place. Mac was glad they had gone to school together because he probably would have teased him and then he'd have to apologize right now. But as it was, Jack gave them both a big smile. Well, hello! What brings you two here? His gaze flicked between the two of them, and Annie hastily backed away from Mac. We're looking for Estelle, actually, Max said, and Annie shot him a look for blowing their cover. But how else were they ever going to find this woman if they didn't ask? We heard she was here earlier, and we had a quick question for her, Annie added with a polite smile. Jack frowned. I only got in an hour ago, so I'm not sure if she's still here. But I know she has some family staying with us for the wedding, so it's possible. Can you tell us the room numbers for her relatives? Annie asked. Well, I probably shouldn't. While Jack weighed the moral implications of giving out guest room numbers, the doors opened with a gust of wind, and a man carrying a large load of firewood stomped his feet on the welcome mats. Oh, there's Gabriel! A furious blush worked its way up Jack's cheeks, and Gabriel's name came out on a breathy exhale. Maybe he's seen Estelle. Jack hustled over to the man with the firewood, and Mac knew he looked the exact same way every time he hurried somewhere for a chance to be near Annie. Jack had it bad for this guy, and Mac could totally relate. While they stood waiting for Jack to return with some answers, another man emerged from the back room. Hello, Annie said, obviously curious about this newcomer. Hello, the man said with a shy smile. I'm just waiting for Jack. Are you a new employee here? Architect, actually. Really? How interesting. Are they doing work on the inn? Annie leaned closer, her elbows on the counter of the check-in desk. That's what we're discussing, the man said. He was soft-spoken with dark-rimmed glasses, and frankly, Mac didn't love the way Annie was looking at him. I'm Annie Andrews. I own the bakery in town, she said, sticking her hand out to shake. Welcome to Dream Harbor. Elliot, he said, shaking Annie's hand. It's nice to meet you. Annie held on to his hand for a beat too long. She glanced at Mac before she said, "Are you free tomorrow night, Elliot?" Mac bit so hard on his tongue to stop himself from protesting that he drew blood. Was Annie actually asking someone out in front of him? This was a new low, and one that he could not handle. The man blushed to the tips of his ears as he stammered, "I'm attending a wedding." "Oh, wonderful. I will see you there then," she said with a smug smile at Mac before Elliot slipped away into the manager's office once again. Mac didn't have time to dwell on that little interaction for too long before Annie had his hand and was tugging him down the hallway. "What?" "Shh." She took a hard left down the first hallway with guest rooms. "It'll be easier for us to take a little look around ourselves," she whispered. "You know you're insane, right?" She stopped and turned to glare at him. "I just want everything to go right and..." "What was that?" "What was what?" "Shh. Annie, I swear to God, if you shush me one more time." Before he could finish his threat, Annie had his hand again and had pulled him into the closest utility closet. It was pitch black inside and smelled like lemon pledge. "Annie." A single finger met his lips, but to her credit, she didn't shush him, and he was too distracted by the feel of her skin on his mouth to do anything but stand in shocked silence. He didn't give a shit what was out in the hallway. If it kept him stuck in this dark closet with Annie, it could stay out there forever. Voices drifted in through the doorway. "I'm just nervous about tomorrow." "But you are head over heels for that man." "I'm not worried about Logan or marriage. It's the wedding part. It's a big event. I want it to go well and everyone to have a good time." Mac knew he recognized that voice. Jenny was in the hall with someone, and Annie didn't want her to know they were here looking for Estelle. Hence the closet hiding place. "You're the bride. All you have to worry about is saying yes. Leave everything else to the rest of us." "Thanks, Mom. Have you seen Aunt Dot? She's supposed to have my something old." A door down the hall opened and the voices faded as they went into the room. Annie was standing so close that she felt her sigh of relief on his cheek. She let her finger fall from his lips and he wanted to grab it and put it back. "I told you," she hissed, snapping him out of his standing too close to Annie's stupor. "You told me what?" "Jenny is stressed about tomorrow, and it's our job to make sure that's not the case." "I don't think her mom meant that we're responsible for a missing person search. I think she was talking about wardrobe malfunctions and drunk uncle situations." Annie huffed, and even though it was dark, he could picture her rolling her eyes at him. "We need to go." She lifted a hand to find the doorknob, but in the cramped space ended up fumbling against his arm and his stomach. He grabbed her wrist before she could grab anything more personal. "Don't you ever rest?" he asked, instead of dwelling on where he'd like Annie's hands to wander. "I'll rest when I'm dead. Annie? Mac?" He tugged a little on her wrist, and to his surprise, she leaned into him, her cheek pressed right over his heart. "Your heart is beating really fast," she whispered. "I know." Still, she didn't move. For one agonizingly perfect minute, she didn't move. She just pressed her face against him and let him twine his fingers with hers. Her breathing slowed and her body relaxed against his. He took a risk and planted a chaste kiss on the top of her head. The soft sigh she let out on the contact was everything he dreamed about in the past 11 years. But like everything else with Annie, it didn't last. "I'm sorry I hurt you," he murmured. Annie pulled away. "You didn't hurt me." "Christ, Annie, will you stop? Will you just accept my apology? I fucked up, okay? We had one perfect month together and then I ruined it. Can we move on, please?" She was fumbling for the doorknob again. "I don't need your apology, Mac, because I'm fine. We hung out for 1 month like a million years ago, and it really doesn't matter to me anymore. Where the hell is the doorknob?" she groaned in frustration. "If it doesn't matter, then why are you pissed at me all the time? Did it ever occur to you that I simply don't like you?" Okay, sure, darling. You and I and everything else in this town know the way you look at me." "Get me out of here," she punctuated each word with a kick to the door. Max sighed and turned the knob. Annie spilled out, almost landing face down on the hallway floor. As he blinked in the suddenly bright light, she glared up at him from the carpet. He reached out a hand to help her up, but she ignored it. "I will find Estelle myself," she said, getting upright and storming down the hallway. "Annie, wait!" He followed her long strides. "You know what, Mac?" She spun to face him. "It wasn't that perfect of a month." "Oh, really? This isn't what you said at the time?" "Well, I faked a lot of things at the time." Mac froze. She could not mean what he thought she meant. "What are you talking about?" Annie raised her eyebrows. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." But you, I thought, she gave him a smug smile. You thought wrong. Bye, Mac. She spun on her heel and left him there, gaping after her, reassessing everything he thought he knew about Annie, about that December, about women in general. Mac hadn't felt this punched in the face since he was actually punched in the face during a bar fight in Tulsa that he got in the middle of by accident. But that blow hurt much less than this one. What the hell, Annie? Mac had followed her out of the parking lot and got to her just as she was realizing they had driven here together. There was no way he was letting her get away with saying something like that and then running off. She should have kept her mouth shut, but this was what happened to her when she spent too much time around Mac. Her sense left her completely and she reverted to childish behavior. But she didn't hate the way Mac looked chasing her across the parking lot. She found it quite satisfying, actually, which of course was part of the problem. We have to go, she said. We don't have time to talk about this right now. Like hell we don't. Mac had caught up to her and had her crowded against his truck. His voice was nearly a growl. With anyone else, she would have felt threatened and perfectly within her rights to use her favorite self-defense maneuver of a knee to the crotch. But with Mac, she found herself wanting to piss him off more, just to make him get closer. You can't drop a piece of information like that and then walk away, he said. She hadn't seen him this mad since she spilled the cocoa in his lap last year. His chest rose with each angry breath and pressed against hers. Damn this winter weather. Why was she wearing so many layers? Annie sighed like this was all very taxing for her and not at all like she wanted to throw Mac into the back seat of his big stupid vehicle and have her way with him. I don't know what you want me to say. Say it's not true, he ground out. Say you said it to make me mad. You're being awfully dramatic about this. Dramatic? Dramatic? After all these years, you're trying to tell me you didn't enjoy yourself when we were together, and I'm supposed to be okay with that? His voice dropped on the word enjoy, and Annie felt it down to her toes. But she'd be damned if she'd let Mac know the effect he was having on her. She rolled her eyes, and she was sure, if it was physically possible, steam would have come out of Mac's ears at the sight of it. The sex was fine. I wasn't expecting much more than that. We were young and inexperienced. It's really not a big deal. Mac was pacing in front of her now, leaving scuff marks in the fine layer of snow that had accumulated in the parking lot. His brow was furrowed, his mouth set in a firm line. He looked like a man whose entire world had been turned upside down. With that one admission, it was like Annie had completely rewritten their past. And she almost felt bad about it. She almost felt bad for him. She nearly relented and told him the rest of the truth. That while she may not have had an orgasm, that night with Mac was still one of the best of her life. But he didn't deserve that truth. Mac kept up his pacing, talking to the pavement instead of Annie. When he finally looked up, there was so much hurt on his face it took Annie's breath away. I thought that night meant something. He stopped moving, and the weight of his stare had Annie pinned to the side of the truck harder than his body had. She could lie, but instead found herself telling the truth. It did mean something, she whispered. Without admission, Max stepped in closer until Annie could feel the heat of him. But he didn't touch her. She really freaking wished he would. Yeah, he said. Yeah, it meant something. She felt him nearly sag in relief. Let me try again, he said, his voice tight. Try again? He was so close now that his words brushed against her ear. Let me try again. His voice dropped, sending shivers through Annie's body that had nothing to do with the falling snow. For a brief second, she actually considered it, letting Mac try again. Her body was very interested in what that might look like. She was hot from her head to her feet and was about 30 seconds away from tearing off both of their coats so she could press herself against him. They had only been 19 the last time she'd had the chance, and she was sure Mac had acquired many new skills since then. Maybe she should let him try. Maybe she was owed the effort. Hate sex was a thing, wasn't it? Maybe they could do that. But what if Annie had one character flaw? It was her pride, and hers had been irreparably injured. I thought it meant something too, she said, meeting his gaze. They were so close their noses nearly touched. I thought it meant something until you ditched me like the whole thing meant nothing. Mac flinched. That's not how it happened, he growled. Annie laughed in his face, causing him to take a step back. Not how it happened. As I remember it, we had an agreement, and you never showed. Annie, I wanted to. Save it, Mac. I don't have time. I have a mani-pedi to get to and a grandmother to track down. Annie opened the door and got into the car, slamming the door shut before Mac could get another word out. She had heard enough from him for one day. If he had wanted to show up all those years ago, he would have done it. She wasn't going to let him rewrite the story now. Just because her body was fooled didn't mean the rest of her would fall so easily. All this reminiscing wasn't doing anyone any good. Chapter 13, then. They'd been walking around the Christmas market for over an hour, and honestly, Mac was surprised Annie had showed up. Almost as surprised as he was that she offered to help in the first place. She was obviously freaked out when they'd woken up together a few mornings ago. She was clearly embarrassed that she'd been all snuggled against him, but Mac had been relieved that it hadn't been the other way around. If he had been the big spoon, it would have been all too clear what he had been dreaming about right before he woke up. And he was pretty sure that waking up with his boner pressed against her ass would have been a surefire way to never see Annie ever again. And at this point, he was positive he wanted to keep seeing her. How about we take a break, he suggested. Annie looked at him, her cheeks rosy above her scarf, and his mind returning to mulling over his new plan. The one in which he kissed Annie, preferably by the end of the day. It had taken precedence over figuring out this cross-country plan. That one seemed significantly less important at the moment. He still wasn't quite sure how to go about it, though. He had wanted to kiss her when he rolled over and saw her next to him in bed, like his dream had somehow come to life, but kissing her in bed seemed like way too much of an escalation, and one that Annie would not have appreciated, especially after he mentioned brushing her teeth. That was a dumb move. Now they were out of bed, and he still wanted to kiss her, and he still couldn't figure out how to do it. Yeah, a break sounds good. It's freezing out here. Annie rubbed her mittened hands together. We can grab hot cocoa in the warming hut, he said. Perfect, she smiled at him, and he wanted to do it right then. He wanted to take her face in his hands and press his mouth to hers until they were both warmed up. No cocoa required. But they were in the middle of the crowded path, and Annie was moving toward the hut before he could do anything about it. He followed her through the other Christmas shoppers into the little makeshift cocoa cabin. It was more of a tent than a cabin, and it wasn't much warmer inside than outside, but at least they were protected from the wind. They went up to the table and got their cocoa and found a seat at a picnic table in the back corner. An older man with a guitar was playing Elvis Presley Christmas classics in the other corner, and the two of the tables were filled with a mix of kids and their parents. It wasn't exactly a romantic setting, but Annie was cozied up next to him, so Mac was feeling pretty good. You warm enough? He asked. Annie laughed. I'm sure I'm warmer than you, she said. Mac still couldn't bring himself to put on a hat. He lifted up his hands. Hey, at least I'm wearing gloves today. Annie nudged him with her shoulder, snuggling in closer. Well, I guess that's progress. She took a sip of her cocoa and gave a little sigh of contentment. Mac wondered if she would make a little noise like that if... No, when he kissed her. So, Annie said, your mom? And that killed any thoughts of those noises Annie would make. What else does she like? So far, the only things Mac had come up with for possible gifts had to do with cooking, which Annie immediately vetoed, saying he could not get her something chore-related for Christmas, or a new scarf, which they had seen at every other craft table, and Annie vetoed as being too impersonal. He was stumped. Annie sighed like she was disappointed in him, and Mac hated that. He thought harder, raking his brain for something else his mom might like. Now he needed this gift not only to soften his mother up to his drive cross-country plan, but it was becoming more and more important in his impress Annie enough to kiss her plan. She likes to read, I guess, he said. Okay, that's good. We can work with that. Annie perked up, and Mac's chest swelled with pride. She was fully leaning against him now, her arm pressed against his, and it reminded him of the way her body felt wrapped around his, so warm and soft. She took another sip of cocoa, clearly deep in thought about things other than Mac, even though all his thoughts seemed to keep circling her. I think I saw e-reader covers at Bernadette's stand. We could look there, she said. Right, yeah, that's a good idea. But neither of them was in a hurry to leave the protection of the tent. They sat pressed against each other. The warmth of Annie's thigh against his took up all of his attention. He barely heard the man crooning Blue Christmas or noticed when the family traipsed back outside. They were alone now, their own little corner of the tent, and it felt like the past few days had felt like he and Annie were the only two people that mattered. Eventually, Annie shifted next to him as she finished her cocoa. She turned to face him on the bench, and Mac thought maybe now was his moment. I have to ask you something, she said. Okay, anything. He leaned in a little closer and took Annie's glance down at his mouth to be a promising sign. She started and then shook her head like she was being silly. You just what? Annie's cheek flushed pink. I was just wondering if you had ever woken up next to a girl before. I mean, it was new for me, and I felt awkward about the whole thing, and I was just wondering if you felt the same. She shook her head again, clearly embarrassed by the whole situation. Sorry, it probably doesn't matter. I don't know why I said anything. There's been a few girls, he started. Right, of course. Of course there has been. I shouldn't have asked. No, I mean, I dated some girls, but I've never stayed up half the night talking to any of them. Oh. He couldn't help but grin at the way her cheeks reddened even more at that. And I like waking up next to you. He leaned in even closer. You did? Of course I did. What's not to like? I don't know. I thought maybe you found the whole thing weird, especially when I was clinging on to you. I wanted you to know that I totally understand what this is, and I get it. You're leaving soon, and this is just... Her voice trailed off. This is just what? This just isn't a thing. We're not a thing. I didn't want you to think I was getting weird romantic ideas about us. Max smirked. Romantic ideas? Oh, God. Annie put a hand over her face. I made it worse, didn't I? He took her wrist and gently pulled her hand away. He smiled at her. You didn't make it worse, and you might not be getting romantic ideas about us, but who says I'm not? Annie's eyes widened in surprise. Now was definitely his chance, and he wasn't going to blow it. He leaned in close enough to hear Annie's breath hitch. Her blue eyes were bright with anticipation. He reached out and tucked a wisp of hair behind her ear, letting his fingers brush along her pink cheek, and there was that little sigh he'd been hoping for. Annie, Sullivan, is that you? The booming voice of one of his former teammates crashed through the tent. Mac winced, squeezing his eyes shut as though he could block out the voice and the person in the whole disastrous moment. But Sean wasn't having it. He headed straight for them, completely oblivious to the fact that he was destroying Mac's entire life. Or at least that was how it felt to Mac. Annie had straightened and moved away from him on the bench so quickly that, by the time Mac opened his eyes, she was already practically at another table. Damn it. Hey man, what are you doing here? Mac tried his best to sound friendly and not like he wanted to murder his old buddy. In fact, if this had happened a week ago, he would have been thrilled to see somebody back in town. But right now, he wanted nothing more than for Sean to disappear. He glanced over at Annie, who was pretending to be very interested in the musical performance, and wouldn't meet his gaze. You know me. I'm here for the food. Sean held up a bag of kettle corn and a box of chocolate fudge. He was a big guy, known by everyone on the team as someone whose real joy in life was eating. Mac's mother, as someone whose real joy in life was feeding people, absolutely loved it when he came over. Sean devoured everything she made. Mac couldn't help but laugh, seeing the man now piled high with Christmas snacks. Glad to hear you haven't changed. Not a bit, Sean grinned. What about you? Christmas shopping? Sean's attention skittered over to where Annie was picking at the edges of her paper cocoa cup. Mac didn't know why, but he felt reluctant to draw attention to the fact that he was here with Annie. Not that he was ashamed of it or anything, but there was something unsettling about seeing these two together. It was like Sean was reminding him of who he had been in high school, and that Mac never would have been this close to kissing Annie. He wasn't sure he wanted to be reminded of that guy, especially not right now. Mac cleared his throat. You know, Annie, she was, helping me. Annie looked up and gave Sean a terse smile. Sean looked confused like he had never seen her before in his life, but he politely smiled back. We had biology together, Annie reminded him, and Sean laughed. Biology, right. I didn't always attend that class. Mac could feel Annie resisting an eye roll. Yeah, well, it's been fun reminiscing, but I should be going anyway. She stood up and Mac wanted to stop her, but he couldn't think of any reasonable way to do it other than grabbing her and throwing her over his shoulder, which he obviously wasn't going to do, although he had to admit the idea did hold some appeal. You don't have to go, Mac said, but Annie was already up and moving, tossing her cup in the trash and heading for the tent exit. I really have to get home, she said. Before Mac could go after her, Sean was already patting him on the back and telling him about the plans to hang out with other members of the team tonight, and all Mac could do was watch Annie walk away, even though that was the last thing he wanted to do. Chapter 14. Now. Annie should have been relaxed, though This was after all the most relaxing part of her day, mani-pedis with the bride. And even though her feet were in the tub, Bubbles at full tilt in the massage chair she was sitting in was doing its best to work out the tension in her neck. Annie was not relaxed in the slightest, mainly because her attention was still back in the parking lot with Matt. She felt like a complete idiot when she realized her appointment was right there at the end, and she'd had to get back out of his car and storm into the spa with Matt calling after her. He texted several times asking if she needed a ride home, which she diligently ignored. But here she was now, doing her best to be in the present moment, when all she could really think about was the devastated look on Mac's face when they talked, and the way he pressed against her, and, most concerningly, how badly she wanted him there. She shook her head. She was supposed to be celebrating with some of her most favorite people in the world, and she was not going to let Mac ruin that for her. "So, hey," she said, turning to her friend beside her, "do you regret skipping all of this before your big day?" Hazel smiled, taking another sip of champagne. "I'm having a great time," she said, "but my wedding was exactly what I wanted." "Well, in that case, I guess I forgive you for ditching us." "I didn't ditch you. We were being spontaneous, and that was honestly why Annie hadn't been more upset about missing her friend's wedding. Hazel being happy and spontaneous was worth it." "Tell us about it," Kara piped up from where she was having her fingernails painted. Next to her was Jenny, who looked much more relaxed than she'd sounded when Annie had been hiding in the closet. But Annie wasn't thinking about the closet incident either. And she's certainly not thinking about how it felt to rest her cheek over Mac's rapidly beating heart. Nope. She was focused on the lovely bride decked out in her white pre-wedding sweatsuit, a gift from the book club. It had bride bedazzled across the back of it. "It was really romantic," Hazel said, getting all dreamy-eyed, like she always did when she talked about her wedding day. "We were on vacation in Aruba, and Noah had just asked me to marry him the day before. We had it all planned out, with an officiant and everything. We went into town, and I picked out a white sundress that we found at one of the little shops. The front desk arranged for flowers to wear in my hair, and Noah looked so gorgeous in his linen button-down with his hair all windswept, and his cheeks freckled and sunburnt. Then it was just us on the beach at sunset, telling each other how much we loved each other." Every woman in the room, including the nail technician, sighed in Hazel's story. Annie had heard it before, but she had to admit it got her every time. "That sounds perfect," Kara said. And then they spent the rest of the week holed up in their hotel room sealing the deal, Annie chimed in, and Hazel's cheeks flushed pink. "And that was perfect too," she said. "Yeah, I bet it was," Kara said, and all the ladies laughed. "And what about you? When do you plan to make an honest man out of my brother?" Jenny asked, turning with a raised eyebrow to Kara. Wouldn't he have to ask her first?" Iris asked from the seat beside Annie. Jenny had insisted that Iris came, even though she wasn't in the wedding party. She'd also invited her mother, several cousins, her employee, Crystal, and Lindsay and Alex from the bookstore. They'd taken over the entire spa for the afternoon. Maybe Dot and Estelle were off in a sauna or massage room somewhere. Annie should probably check on that before she left. "Well, technically," Kara started before Jenny chimed in. "He's asked her multiple times," she said. "He has?" Annie nearly jumped out of her seat. How did she not know this? Kara shrugged. "Yes, technically he has asked. He has a weird habit of saying, 'Marry me, Peaches,' whenever we're just having a really great day or something." Kara's impression of Bennett's deep voice had everyone giggling again. "But I don't think he means it." "He means it," Jenny was adamant. "I'm not sure I want to get married," Kara insisted. Iris ran a hand over her belly. "I don't think it's necessary. If you two are happy together, that's all that matters." "Right," Kara said with a nod, and then she gave a little shrug. "Maybe one day I'll say yes and see what he does then." Annie shook her head with a laugh. "Poor Bennett." Kara waved a hand, careful not to mess up her nails. "Oh, please. That man is fine." "Well, married or not, he'd go to the ends of the earth for you," Jenny said. Kara smiled. "Yeah, I know. He's a keeper." "Okay, I want to hear more about this wedding," Iris said. "Obviously, I know all about the food. Archer's been talking about it for months. But what else have you guys planned?" "Everyone's dying to see the barn all done up, Kara. It already looked amazing at the rehearsal dinner." "I know! I can't wait to see it tomorrow," Jenny jumped in. Kara smiled, but Annie could see the nerves on her face. She knew how hard her friend had worked over the past 6 months to get this plan up and running. Ever since she and Bennett had found a stash of secret treasure on the farm, they put all their effort into transforming the barn into an an event space. And now the wedding of the season was her first real event. Annie knew how important it was to her to pull it off. But she would. Annie didn't doubt it. It's going to look gorgeous, she said. The barn is so much bigger than I originally thought, and Kira did an amazing job overseeing the remodel. We have all white linens, white candles, white lights. It's a winter wonderland with pops of red flowers. What were those flowers you picked, Jenny? White anemones and red peonies, and then Daisy is going to add pine bows to the tables as well. Right, Annie said. The vision is completely on point. Kira smiled at her in thanks. Alexa, stop. Iris leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. That sounds beautiful. And the dress, Hazel added, how did the last fitting go? It went really well. My mom was able to come and we only cried a little. You sure about that? Okay, we cried a lot, but it was everything I dreamed of. Jenny handed her phone to Iris so she could see pictures of the dress. Annie had been with her when she found it, a gorgeous frothy confection that made her look like a winter princess with a fitted top and a deep V in the front. Lace vines and flowers ran down the bodice and onto the skirt, as well as down the long sleeves. Logan was going to absolutely lose his mind. Damn, Jenny, you're going to look amazing in this, Iris said. And Annie agreed. She does. Annie could already feel herself getting choked up. Hazel reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. You can't start crying yet. Annie shook her head. I've been crying for weeks. Are you bringing a date? Francine, the woman currently working on her toes, asked, bringing everyone's attention back to Annie. Because my nephew... I'm going to stop you right there, Fran. I'm not looking for a date. Four heads turned to stare at Annie as Jenny, Hazel, Kira, and Iris looked at her in disbelief. What? You're going to show up to an event without a date, and Mac will also be without a date, Jenny pointed out. I don't see why that's relevant. Annie refused to engage in this line of questioning or to think about Mac charging across the parking lot to get to her, or how it would feel to see him in the sexy suit she was sure he'd be wearing. Jenny gave a little shrug like she wasn't going to push the matter, but then she went ahead and pushed it. I'm just saying, it's rare that you're both unattached at these things. Seems like it might be a good opportunity. A good opportunity for what, Jean Marie? Jenny wrinkled her nose at the use of her full name. I don't know. A good opportunity to bury the hatchet. There is no hatchet. We don't need to bury anything, and we certainly don't need to be near each other anymore than is strictly necessary. Like I promised you, I've been on my best behavior, but that's all I can promise. Okay, Jenny put her hands up with her newly painted nails in surrender. I appreciate it. Jenny let it drop, and the girls turned their attention back to more pressing matters. Like, was it really bad luck to see the bride before the wedding? Because Jenny had no intention of sleeping away from her groom tonight. I don't think it matters, Iris weighed in, and Kira agreed. As long as he doesn't see you in your dress, Hazel added. Says a woman who shopped for her dress with her groom, Jenny said with a laugh. Hazel shrugged. He helped pick it out, but he didn't see me in it until we were both on the beach together. It's nice to have it be a surprise, don't you think? I do think that's romantic, to have his first look of you in the dress as you walk down the aisle, Kira said, blowing on her fingernails. Logan is going to cry so much, Annie said. Iris looked at her in surprise. You think so? That guy is all gooey inside. He's for sure going to cry. Did Noah cry? Iris turned back to Hazel. There were tears, she confirmed, and everyone sighed again. What was it about making grown men cry that was so damn satisfying? Okay, so we're all agreed. I can sleep with Logan tonight, but he can't see me in the dress. That's right, Kira said. That feels like a good compromise. Okay, we're going to stop there on page 130. Ooh. I like these things so much. Thank you guys for being here. And these are short books compared to anything else I read. They're very short reads. We're almost halfway. Wow. But I hope you guys are enjoying this book, and make sure you share this with everyone and get them to read the book. And make sure you subscribe to my channel. That will really help me hit 500. And like or dislike the video, and put down below what you think is going to happen next, I guess. And make sure you share it. Make sure you subscribe. That would be awesome if you're not subscribed. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.